Welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. If you're tired of censorship, outraged by government abuses, and thirsty for real insights, then you're in the right place. Get ready, because here, the fight for freedom never ends. Here's your host, Professor Nick Giordano.
What's up, everyone, and welcome to the America's Founding Series, part of the P.A.S. Report podcast. I'm your host, Nick Giordano, and our nation, it's still reeling from the assassination of Charlie Kirk, because we stand at a crossroads where the fundamental right to speak freely feels more precarious than ever. And in the shadow of recent events, we have voices like Charlie Kirk that have tragically been silenced. And we have to ask the question, what price did our founders truly place on freedom of speech, on the idea of free expression, the exchange of ideas, on this concept of robust debate? And to understand that, to understand why free speech isn't just a luxury, but the beating heart of liberty, to understand why I believe free speech is non-negotiable, to understand why Charlie Kirk's death actually matters, we have to turn to a forgotten patriot, because history is designed to repeat itself. And a man whose fiery words lit the fuse of the revolution and his sacrifices, for those words remain powerful. And I'm talking about a poignant lesson for all of us. I'm talking about James Otis Jr. Now, the last name is going to sound familiar to you because a few months ago, I focused on his wife, Mercy Otis. But today I want to focus on him because his life and legacy is one that parallels what we are witnessing today. And I want you to go back to Boston, 1761, 14 years before the official start of the American Revolution, 15 years before the Declaration of Independence. This was a city that was simmering with discontent. The colonists, growing tired of the heavy hand of British rule, they were tired of the abuses, the usurpations. Life for a lot of people in this area was defined by this sense of vulnerability because of something called writs of assistance. These weren't typical search warrants. These were open-ended perpetual licenses for British customs officials to raid homes, raid shops, raid ships, and all they needed was a mere suspicion to search for maybe smuggled goods. There was no need for specific evidence. There was no limit on the power. And your home, your sanctuary, that could be invaded at any moment. The British didn't need a specific cause or even a specific target. This is unchecked power. This is an assault on private property. Push a brilliant young lawyer to a momentous decision. That's James Otis Jr. He held a lucrative position as the Crown's Advocate General. He was part of the establishment. He was part of the British, but he couldn't stomach the injustice he was witnessing. So he resigned in protest from this prestigious post, and he turned his back on personal gain. He did what many would fail to do. He decided to challenge British authorities. He decided to challenge these writs of assistance in court, not as a defender of smugglers, but he wanted to defend liberty itself. And on a cold February day, crowded courtroom at the old State House, Otis stood before the Superior Court. His argument, it wasn't just a legal brief. It was a thunderclap for nearly 5 hours. 5 hours, he laid bare the tyrannical nature of these writs, arguing they were unconstitutional, they were void, even if Parliament authorizes them. He declared with a passion that electrified everyone present that a man's house is his castle. He wasn't just challenging legal policy. He was asserting the fundamental right of ordinary people to stand up, to speak out, to use their words as weapons against government overreach, against authoritarianism. And there was another man in the courtroom, a young John Adams, then a rising lawyer who sat captivated in the courtroom. And years later, he would recount the moment of that courtroom. He was in awe. And he wrote, "Then and there, the child of independence was born." Think of that. John Adams, one of the most prominent and important founding fathers. Imagine if there was no John Adams. What would have happened to the United States? Now, obviously, it's speculation. It's impossible to tell. But I cannot overstate how important Adams was to the founding of this country. He was inspired by a single man in a courtroom whose fiery words would challenge British authority. It stirred something in him. It stirred his soul. And if Adams didn't sit in that courtroom that day, who knows if the United States would even exist? Now, Otis didn't succeed in immediately overturning the writs, but he did do something else. His triumph in the courtroom ignited a spark of defiance across the colonies. His passion gave courage to those who were too afraid to speak out. He ignited something much bigger in the hearts of a lot of the colonists, and it was the fire of liberty, because he continued after that. He wrote in pamphlets, he gave speeches, and he railed against British policies. This made him a hero to the Patriot cause, but it also made him a reviled enemy to the Loyalists, to the Crown, and he became a target. Fortunately, there is a cost to speaking out, as we witnessed last week. In 1769, the price of his outspokenness against the British came due, and after a scathing article published in the Boston Gazette that criticized British customs officials, Otis confronted a customs commissioner named John Robinson in a coffee house, and a brutal brawl ensued. Otis was savagely beaten by Robinson and other Loyalists, and he was struck repeatedly in the head with a cane. He was nearly killed, and while physically his body did recover, his mind never did. The mental damage was too far. James Otis Jr.'s mind once was sharp, incisive, eloquent. It was now broken. He suffered from delusions. He would have periods of lucidity mixed with periods of confusion, and at times he could still deliver flashes of his brilliance, but more often than not, he was lost. Friends and allies who once leaned on him are now going to pity him. And for a movement built on words and persuasion, it was a chilling reminder to everyone that the man who gave his voice to liberty had been beaten into silence. Nobody debated him. It wasn't better ideas presented. It was a raw and brutal attack to shut him up. His voice was now extinguished by those who couldn't win arguments, who didn't have the facts on their side, those who went against truth. But even in decline, Otis remained a symbol. Patriots whispered about his sacrifice, about the cost of daring to speak too boldly against the power of the British. And his tragedy made his words echo even louder than before. Think about that when you think about Charlie Kirk. It made him bigger than maybe what he would have been. And it wasn't that it all came to an end, because where he left off, his wife, Mercy Otis Warren, stepped forward. James's voice is fading. Her voice grew stronger. She wielded her pen and continued the battle for liberty, the battle he could no longer fight. She would write satirical plays mocking the British, essays that rallied colonists to the cause. In many ways, she kept his legacy alive, and Mercy refused to be silent. Together, their lives remind us that there's a struggle for freedom. There is a struggle for free expression. It's never about one person. It's about ensuring that voices of truth cannot at all be extinguished. When people are unable to engage in reasoned, rational debate, they seek to destroy. Now, we need to take a quick commercial break, so hang tight and we'll be right back. Are you ready to move easily and independently without pain and stiffness holding you back? Do you want to look in the mirror and see a hydrated glow instead of more fine lines and wrinkles? Well, discover Native Path Collagen, made with only type 1 and 3 collagen fibers. These are the two most important types that make up 90% of the collagen found in your cartilage, bones, skin, hair, nails, and gut. They provide maximum benefits, and Native Path Collagen is a single ingredient formula with no fillers, additives, or artificial sweeteners. Plus, it's third-party tested for heavy metals, ensuring purity and safety. Completely flavorless, Native Path Collagen can be added to anything: coffee, smoothies, oatmeal, you name it. It doesn't clump, it absorbs fast thanks to its peptide formula. And the best part, Native Path offers amazing bundle deals at a fraction of the price of other brands. With over 4 million jars sold, 1 million happy customers, 8,000 5-star reviews, and a 365-day no-risk guarantee, Native Path is a brand you could trust. They offer an 800 number for any questions you may have, and then you'll speak to a real person who's there to help. Visit getnativepath.com/PAS and start your transformation today. That's getnativepath.com/PAS. Welcome back to the PAS Report podcast. This is the America's Founding series, and if you're finding this episode valuable, make sure to follow and subscribe to the platform so you never miss an episode. Also, leave the PAS Report a quick review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify so more listeners can discover the show. And share it with your friends and family. Share it with people that truly believe in free speech. We're talking about the tragedy of James Otis Jr. and how it burned deeply into the consciousness of the founders. How they understood all too intimately the danger of suppressing voices, not just through legal means, but through physical and social intimidation. They knew that when debate is stifled, when opposition is silenced, that the foundations of self-government cannot exist. The foundations of self-government will crumble. the authoritarian hold will only grow stronger. And I want you to consider the example of John Adams, the same man who sat in the courtroom in awe of James Otis. Following the Boston Massacre, he would take on a seemingly impossible task of defending the British soldiers charged with murder. It's not like Adams had any love for them, but he believed they had a right to counsel, that they had a voice, and he and his co-counsel, Josiah Quincy, accepted the case knowing full well that they would be defending the very men the public viewed as murderous tyrants, the very men they despised. And the atmosphere in Boston was volatile. It was dangerous. Mobs roamed the streets. Adams was risking his career. He was risking his reputation and his life by taking the case, but he was unwavering in his principles. He believed that even the most hated people, even those accused of atrocity, deserve a fair hearing. And during the trial, he argued, facts are stubborn things. And wherever may be our wishes, our inclinations, or the dictates of our passions, they cannot alter the state of facts and evidence. Adams understood that without the rule of law and due process, without the ability to speak freely, without the ability to debate the issues, a society descends into mob rule and silences the opposition by any means necessary. So he defended British soldiers not because he was a loyalist, but because he was a man of principle. He knew that the liberties of the Patriots themselves depended on proving that their new society is going to be something different. It's going to be founded on law, not on passions of the moment. It's going to be founded on liberty. Benjamin Franklin also understood this. He understood the immense power of debate, the power of the press, and the danger of suppression. As a printer, he believed in a free and open marketplace of ideas. In his 1722 Silence Do Good essays, he declared, "Without freedom of thought, there can be no such thing as wisdom." Think about how radical that was. Franklin was essentially saying that a government can strip you of wealth, of comfort, even of safety, but as long as you could think and speak, liberty still has a chance to survive. And ask yourself, what happens when people are too afraid to speak out? He went on to say that without freedom of speech, which is the right of every man, as far as by it he does not hurt or control the right of another, and this is the only check it ought to suffer and the only bounds it ought to know. And I want you to think about what Franklin is saying and then think about Charlie Kirk. The last part of that line is especially revealing when we view it through the lens of Charlie Kirk's assassination. Franklin understood that the only legitimate limit to speech is when it directly robs someone else of their equal liberty, when it becomes an act of coercion or physical harm to silence someone else. Charlie's work never crossed that line. What he did was challenge prevailing orthodoxies. He debated the tough issues on college campuses, and sometimes it would provoke sharp disagreement, but he never deprived anyone of their right to speak freely. He never deprived anyone of the right to push back. In fact, he gave voices to those that disagreed with them. He encouraged them. He gave them a platform to challenge his ideas, his convictions. And he taught them to think critically. For that, he was assassinated. The ultimate form of control, death, because some want to refuse to answer words with words. They see those that disagree with them as subhuman and believe that somehow they're morally superior, but in reality, they are nothing more than cowards. And Franklin's principle reminds us that disagreement, even fierce disagreement, it's not harm, it's not offensive, it's not evil, it's not Nazism. A free republic depends on it. It depends on our willingness to defend the right to speak, even for those we oppose and disagree with. To forget this truth is to abandon everything we stand for. And he understood that, quote, "And in those wretched countries where a man cannot call his tongue his own, he can scarce call anything else his own. Whoever would overthrow the liberty of a nation must begin by subduing the freeness of speech." Like Adams, Franklin was a man of principle. He practiced what he preached. He published material in his Pennsylvania Gazette paper. He personally disagreed with this material, but he published it anyway because he believed it was his duty to give all sides of an argument a voice and allow the public to come to their own conclusions, to make up their own mind. He believed that only people or groups guilty of wrongdoing fear open debate and free expression because free speech brings their corruption and lies into the open. See, to him, public discussion and criticism are like sunlight. They serve as a disinfectant. They expose wrongdoing to everyone. In other words, truth will always thrive with free speech. Guilt thrives in silence. And Franklin's point remains relevant today. The guilty instinctively try to censor and intimidate their critics because they cannot engage in honest debate, and it exposes them for the frauds they are. Franklin understood that the free exchange of ideas, even unpopular ones, was the only pathway to truth. The founders embraced robust debate precisely because it strengthened their arguments. It refined their ideas. Ultimately, they understood its necessity. And Thomas Jefferson was another champion of free speech. He was another champion of freedom of the press. He famously stated, "Were left to me to decide whether we should have a government without newspapers or newspapers without government, I should not hesitate a moment to prefer the latter." He believed that an informed public, even if it's misled at times, was the ultimate check on government power. Tyrants and mobs, they fear debate because it exposes their weaknesses. See, the tyrants and mobs, they seek uniformity of thought, uniformity of opinions, and they want to achieve that uniformity through coercion, suppression, censorship, violence. It is Orwellian. And for our founders, disagreement wasn't a threat to liberty, it was the guarantee of liberty. It forces people to use reason and logic as opposed to intimidation and violence. So we have to look at what lessons does James Otis Jr.'s story and the founder's wisdom tell us today? What does it hold for us today? And understand that every time someone self-censors out of fear of being canceled or doxxed, losing their livelihood, the enemies of liberty are scoring a victory. It's a death by 1,000 cuts to the republic because each word that we leave unspoken weakens us as a country, and it's a betrayal of our God-given liberties. It only serves authoritarian interests. We are living in a time of intense tribalism where people are quick to label and condemn those that they disagree with. They look at them, as I said, as subhuman. And this climate of fear leads to a new form of tyranny. People feel that they have to hold back their thoughts, their questions, their opinions, because they don't want to deal with the social backlash. They don't want to deal with haters. And this is just about un-American as it gets. Nobody should be attacked for their opinion. State your opinion. Defend your opinion. Fight for your opinion. But do it in a nonviolent way. The free exchange of ideas is what made our republic work for 238 years. It was the harsh debates that we had that weren't all that pleasant. Because these debates, it forced us to listen. It forces us to argue. It forces us to change our minds based on evidence and new information that we learn. James Otis Jr. was silenced with a cane. Charlie Kirk was silenced with a bullet. The weapons may have changed, but the goal remains the same: to stop words that challenge power. And the truth is, they only win if we let them win. The founders believed that courage wasn't just standing on a battlefield with a musket. It was standing in the arena of ideas. It was willing to take criticism. It was willing to refuse to be silent. Otis risked everything to speak, and he did pay the ultimate price. So did Charlie. Will we honor their sacrifice, or are we going to let fear dictate what we can and cannot say? If the child of independence was born in that Boston courtroom, then we have a duty, an obligation to keep that voice alive. And that begins with never, ever surrendering the right to speak freely. It is something that is so important that makes our society function. This is what creates American exceptionalism. We are the one country in the world that actually has this concept of real freedom of speech. And if that gets extinguished, our country is extinguished. It is always great to join you on the America's Founding series, part of the P.A.S. Report podcast. And I really hope that this episode resonates with every American out there, because we have gone far astray from what the founders envisioned. I want to thank you for joining me, and I'll be back next week with more great episodes of the P.A.S. Report podcast.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report. Don't forget to rate, share, and hit that subscribe button. That way you'll never miss an episode. For more exclusive content and updates, visit us at pasreport.com and follow Professor Giordano on all social media platforms at PAS Report.